This episode of Zidanza is going to be a throwback Thursday. Yeah, throwback to the Old Testament as we take a look at what Moses and the gang have been up to in a little country called Egypt. Also, we may look at some videos and articles and stuff. All that and more on Zidanza. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Zidanza. I am Objectively Dan, co-host of this wonderful live show that always starts at the exact time that it's supposed to, and never has any technical difficulties whatsoever. Right, Prophet Azad, fellow co-host of Zidanza?
The show actually did start at the right time. It's just, here's what happened. Dan and I are sitting there opening up the show. I see all kinds of activity in the chat, but I look up and I can't see a live count of how many people are watching.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, where is this at? I'm getting a little disoriented. And I look over and realize I hadn't pushed the go live button. So
that's right. So we
were sitting here putting on a show with nobody watching.
Yep. Yep. Just talking to ourselves, apparently, entertaining an audience of no one. But despite that, we move on. Just like Moses moved on from the many trials and tribulations that he had to go through as chronicled in the Old Testament, which we're going to be looking at today. It's a throwback Thursday for multiple reasons. One, we're looking at that Old Testament. You know the one. Two, we're talking about we're doing like an old school atheist sort of thing today, I think. Just for giggles, just for laughs. And going to be looking at the Bible story and then people's reactions to the Bible story and then reacting to other people's reactions to that Bible story. So it's going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, this brings back the old days of internet atheism, at least for me, because back when I was first starting on YouTube, one of the first things I did a lot, and this started with my remedial Bible lessons and my little very first project, which was that Lego thing I did, which is about this very topic about the plagues on Egypt. My first kind of delving into critical thinking about Christianity was looking at Old Testament Bible stories. And so I thought it'd be fun to bring that a little bit back. YouTube atheism has gotten, I think it's kind of grown. It's gotten more sophisticated, talked about more theological concepts. And I thought it'd be fun to take an old time look at the Bible while still doing what we already do here on this show, which is look at a variety of different things. So we're going to look at some apologetics, look at how we're going to watch a very short cartoon about the Exodus story designed for kids. And we have a little bag of very strange toys on this topic, which I'm going to be excited to share with you as well.
In any other context, that would be extremely weird. Actually, you know what? It is weird in this context too. I take that back. It's just as weird. But anyway, we'll see what you have in your little bag of tricks in a bit here. For now, let's talk about what story are we talking about today, Zod? Which one? Because there's many stories in the Old Testament.
So this is the story of the Exodus. And more specifically, it is the story of God sending plagues down to Egypt. And I thought first, just to open this up, we would just talk through this real quick, kind of like we did with the free will thing last time, before we get into all the weird Christian takes on this.
Yeah.
What does the story actually say about this? And is it ever problematic, perhaps? I think those are worth unpacking just briefly at the start.
Yeah, so Moses is kind of a character that people write about that may or may not have existed in history, but certainly all the things described in the Bible were not accurate too, right? It's one of those, like, every single other year of this dude's life, God's like doing stuff and interacting with him and everyone around him, and he's just the most important special boy in the whole world. In this particular instance, he not only talks to the direct leadership of the Egyptian government at the time, and makes a statement. But like frees an entire civilization's worth of people out of the country through supernatural bio warfare, essentially, which is kind of crazy. I think it was always pointed as like a good thing at the time because it's like, oh, these are God's people, right? And these Israelites are being enslaved, right? So yeah, this is what's happening. But then like, civilians are kind of involved. Like it's not really like, I don't know. For some reason, everybody in Egypt, like if your heritage is Egyptian, gets to suffer basically in this story, which is really, 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 really fucked up. But I didn't really think about it like that, I guess, back then.
Yeah. This, I think, may be the single worst story ever told in human history.
Mm.
Okay. Maybe not the worst, but I don't know that there could be a much worse story, at least that's largely revered by our society.
Mm.
I don't think our society broadly looks positively upon a worse story than this one. It's just absolutely disgusting and really kind of psychopathic. It's very strange. Um, and I think first of all, I think you mentioned the purpose of this whole thing. I think what we need to get down to is actually what God was trying to do with with all these plagues. What do
Mm-hmm.
you understand to have been the purpose of it? And chat, you can join in if you have thoughts too.
The purpose of it, okay, so Moses is like, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, no. And God's like, all right, I'm gonna do some stuff here. Basically, like, he pleads to him and plagues start to happen. And then the most interesting part of the story is Pharaoh's heart was hardened by God explicitly within the text. So like that is used as a precedent for some reason to again murder more civilian populations through bio warfare. Like that's what's happening here. It's like if if our president like said some mean stuff and then American citizens just got gassed, right? Like if President Biden denied, I don't know, some sort of foreign stipulation or something, and then just American citizens just were gassed to death. That would be ridiculous, right? That would be a tragedy. People should be outraged because I don't think anybody would justify something like that. And yet, this is literally this story, but actually worse in many
Yeah.
ways. So yeah, like I don't think you're wrong in saying it may be one of the worst like revered stories. But the defense is always, oh well, these people were enslaved, I guess, and so this is the way that it had to happen, but not really.
Yeah. So first off, one thing I think is weird is that the story depicts God sitting up in heaven and suddenly he's just sitting there having a good time minding his business and he suddenly hears the cries of Israel rising up from
Mm-hmm.
Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And as if he had forgotten about them, suddenly he hears their voices. He hears that they're in agony. He's like, "Oh shit, the Israelites."
Yeah.
And Exodus literally says God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant and decided that he would go and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual real stated goal of what he did in Egypt, in fact, according to the Bible, the reason Egypt existed and became powerful is because God raised them up specifically so that he could knock them down. So this whole thing happened for God's glory. So Exodus and also later on, I think in Romans, God says that, let's see, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that I may multiply signs in Egypt. Basically, I'm going to, I lost the point of where
I'm
I was
gonna
at
fuck
there.
shit
But
up, is what he
yeah,
says.
basically, I have raised you up so that my name will be proclaimed throughout the earth. So he just said that he raised up Pharaoh and Egypt just so he could be more glorified.
Mm-hmm.
So God wanted to show off and show how cool he was. So he set Egypt up and did all these plagues just so that in world history there would be this story of him knocking down a mighty empire. So I think that's kind of trash behavior. I think you really could show that you are a god and exist and are powerful without a big, massive act of kind of genocidal terrorism.
Yeah. Now, of course, the good news
That,
is nothing in this story is real, right? This is an ethnobiographic account of one's origins, that being the ancient Jewish people. And so obviously it's kind of just pretty much all made up in some regard. I mean, like, we could talk about the historical, like, reality of what this would look like for Egyptian people, like what this would look
yeah,
like across the landscape, like what this would look like for Egyptian people's history. But funnily enough, it's only Jewish people that ever talk about this story. It's not like Egypt has ever like had a thing where it's like, yeah, this is crazy. Just our slaves just like threw plagues on us one time, and yeah, that was a really wild part. Like, no, it's never, been documented in any other place besides the Bible. Yet millions of people today believe that it's a real historical phenomenon, which I think is the weirdest part about this whole thing.
yeah.
Really. Hmm.
And when it's come up in conversation on social media, and a couple people, including me a little bit, were making fun of it and talking about how bad and problematic the story is. And some people chimed in and said that we were really lacking empathy, and it's really troubling that we could make fun of that story and stuff like that. I'm like, this story lacks more empathy than any. We're basically using humor to shed light on the fact that this is a very bad story. Nothing shows less empathy than enjoying the fact that your god destroyed someone's food supply and animals, covered them with diseases and sores and plagues, and eventually killed their children. I think that's lacking in empathy. If you celebrate that, using humor to point out why it's not cool, I think that's relatively benign by comparison. That's just me.
Yeah. Also, again, I have to emphasize, none of this actually happened. Like, this is the equivalent of being like, oh, how could you make fun of the stormtroopers or the rebels in the Galactic War? Because they're brave freedom fighters. It's just like it's not real. We're talking about make believe stories. And yeah, I do think revolution, and rising up against your oppressors in order to gain equality is a legitimate thing to justify sometimes. The difference is when you have a supernatural being on your side, right? Like, you can definitely make things go a completely different way. You don't actually have to murder anybody, for one, let alone
Yeah,
make people suffer in excruciatingly gruesome ways as the Bible describes it here. If in any other context, like if you just found this book and you read about this story, you would look at this and be horrified, I think. At least a modern audience
yeah.
would. But we've grown up in a culture that has really glorified this in more ways than one. For me, like, it was the animated movie and stuff too. I mean, people love that um particular depiction of it.
Well,
But
and while the story itself isn't real and we're not making fun of real people, what I think is real is the phenomenon of people looking to it as like an exemplar of something holy or something righteous, like
yeah.
admiring that story. That, I think, um, that dehumanizes characters in a story they think is real. And I think it trains Christians to dehumanize the other and to think that it's acceptable for things to happen to them that shouldn't. And I think it honestly does feed into how Christians can view like an enemy or somebody else in society that they think is the outsider.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
one other aspect of this is if as the Bible said, God raised Egypt up just so he could strike them down. Um, the reason his people are suffering is because God created this big, powerful oppressor that was able to bring them into slavery. And so God kind of caused that to happen. Never mind the fact that he called them out of slavery and brought them into their own land so that then they could start owning slaves, which I don't think the Bible's really concerned with the question of slavery as much as the question of whether
Yeah.
their people
The,
are holding the slaves or being slaves.
it wasn't the fact that human beings were being enslaved the problem of this rather is that it's God's chosen people that were being held as slaves, right? Like
Yeah.
this is a supremacist story. This is an ethno-supremacist story. This is when Jewish people, and I'm not talking about modern Jewish people. I mean, obviously some of them still do this today, but we're talking about the Old Testament. When they're talking about Jewish people, they constantly say we are God's chosen people. Like that is the most narcissistic thing you can possibly say about your own civilization. It's unacceptable when white people today say, yeah, we're God's chosen people, because we inherently recognize that's fucked up. But for some reason, when we look at this story, we say, oh, yeah, this is great. Yeah, that's God's chosen people. What does it mean for a God who created all of humanity to have a specifically like racial like ethnicity that's held above other people? Like it's just a really fucked up concept, but we just don't view it in that lens. We really just think of it as, I don't know, it's just history. It's just how it happened according to Christians and Jews, I guess. Very
Yeah.
very strange thing overall.
Yeah. The problem isn't slavery. The problem is we're the ones supposed to be owning slaves, not be
Exactly.
slaves.
It really is like that. But yeah,
And
let's
Shivers
yeah.
has an interesting comment, makes the biblical character sound MAGA adjacent, which I think, and I'm going to talk about this in not the video that came out today, but the one that's going to come out in 2 weeks. I'm dealing with a person who claims that he was a Christian and started deconstructing and only gained a stronger faith through deconstruction. And his journey sounds, a little suspiciously formulaic, but he starts getting troubled by Trump and MAGA and the hard turn that evangelicalism has taken. And I appreciate that he is troubled by that. But if you're going to deconstruct that, you really have to look at how Christian ideas of looking to a hero Messiah figure, looking for an enemy to defeat so that you can make society into the image you want. All that stuff doesn't come out of nowhere, and it doesn't connect itself to Christianity out of nowhere. So I think that's an important, interesting connection.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Now,
Well,
obviously,
let's
one other problematic thing, of course, is God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That's
yeah.
one of the title things on this, and the fact that God was taking away Pharaoh's free will to do that. He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy. That's one of my favorite lines from Life of Brian.
Yeah.
One other thing, this is just a side thing, and it's just something I always thought was funny. Through the plagues on Egypt, on the plague, God still kills all the livestock in the plague on livestock, right? That's
Yes.
kind of true by definition.
I believe
On that
that's what
plague,
happened. Yeah.
yeah, he killed every single animal on that plague. Later, further down the line, he kills Egyptian animals on with the plague of hail.
Mm-hmm.
So all the Egyptians' animals are supposed to be dead, but he killed them again with the plague of hail. And then after they had died 2 times in previous plagues, then the firstborn of Egyptians' animals are included in the plague on the firstborn. For some reason, he wanted the firstborn of animals to die. So if some dog gave birth to a litter of puppies, I guess the one that came out first was going to be stricken down. And then Pharaoh still had animals to, pull his chariots out and chase the Israelites across the Red Sea. So that's another little funny thing that I always got a kick out of.
Yeah. God's not vegan for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Or any part of the religion. Not really down for that. Animals are just kind of byproducts of human conflict, I guess. Like they're just like, oh well, you guys get to die too because we're fighting about stuff. Like, okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Or even in peacetime, where you're supposed to cut them open and ritually mutilate them.
Yeah.
So I don't think he
True.
has much concern for anything that isn't considered having a soul. So with all that stuff, all those problems in this story, let's take a look at a couple ways people deal with it. You want to do that?
Yeah, I think it's time. Let's do it.
I thought it would be first fun to watch a story. This is called The Plagues of Egypt. It's a children's cartoon. So maybe we could briefly look at how Christians deal with showing this to children, which I find very weird. This is a very short cartoon, but we'll watch it real quick.
Pharaoh's choices against the Lord. Moses trusted the Lord and returned to Egypt. Moses and his brother Aaron went to Pharaoh and asked him to let the Israelites be free and leave Egypt. Pharaoh was angry and refused. He forced the Israelites to work even harder. Because Pharaoh did not listen to the Lord, the Egyptians were cursed with terrible plagues. First, all the water in Egypt turned into blood. Moses asked Pharaoh again to let the Israelites go, but Pharaoh said no. Next, the Lord sent frogs to Egypt. They were everywhere. Pharaoh said he would let the Israelites go if the frogs went away. The Lord made the frogs go away, but Pharaoh didn't let the Israelites go. Then the
So this story is really just telling a repeated sequence of events. God sends a plague. Pharaoh says he'll let the people go, and then he doesn't, right? Do you notice anything they're omitting or changing in how they depict Pharaoh's defiance?
Well, I mean, they are making, of course, the insinuation that Pharaoh is the one that's responsible for his own actions and own choices, if that's what you mean. Or were you saying
Yeah,
something more specific?
no, that was pretty much it. Like,
Okay.
they're just saying that Pharaoh refused. This
Right.
doesn't really even make logical sense. And I think you kind of need God hardening Pharaoh's heart to make any sense out of this. Because if these kinds of devastating things are happening to your country over and over and over again, and you have every reason to think it's going to keep happening, why would you keep saying, yeah, I'll let them go? Okay, no.
Yeah. And then imagine a children's story narrator being like, and then the United States government dropped Agent Orange onto the civilian population of fighting against with the Viet Cong. Like that's why would nobody would do that. It's just not a thing. But for some reason, again, we're just okay with this somehow. I mean, it's just really cutesy, and I don't know. It's just very weird.
Well, and I don't even think this is really that cutesy. Like, they're covering over the fact that God hardened Pharaoh's heart and forced this thing to keep happening.
It's cutesy because it's a cartoon. I don't think I'd make cartoons about people getting Agent Orange, but for some reason we could do the same thing with people dying from plagues and stuff. Like, again, bioterrorism in this in this context. But
I just think we don't fully appreciate how troubling it is that people in our society, modern people, show this to their kids and think that this is some kind of good lesson or positive story, when you're graphically seeing people being like covered in sores and dying and stuff like that. Like, this is really gross stuff to show kids.
There are more people enslaved in the United States, if my numbers are right in my head, in the history of the United States than there were Jewish people enslaved in Egypt, historically, according to the Bible, right? I really wonder why God didn't send any plagues on the Americans, or at least during the South and Civil War. You think that would be a good recompense, but it didn't really happen, huh?
I think he was saving all his hurricanes for gays. Like, he had to wait for a real problem.
Yeah, you got to build up a stockpile. Yeah, that's on back order.
Yeah.
Those hurricanes. Yeah, true.
Speaking of messed up priorities, like, Christians are totally cool with showing this to kids, but then, like, if a drag queen puts on a dress and reads a much nicer story, that becomes a problem.
Yeah, that's also true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read a story about admiring God causing devastation to an entire civilization of men, women, and children. Just don't wear a dress while you're doing it.
Right. I do think when people tell this story in a church context, there is almost a non-realism to it. I think there is kind of a sort of cognitive disassociation from the history you learn about in school and then the history you learn about in Sunday school. At least there was for me. Like, I had a lot of dissonance later in life trying to put two and two together, because, like, well, for example, I believed in evolution when I was a kid. I never doubted evolution being a thing from when I fully understood it. By the time I got to, like, high school, it wasn't until, like, college when I was kind of putting stuff together and be like, wait a minute, how do you put these two things up together here and make it work, right? So I think there's a lot of Christians that probably tell this story, right, and don't even consider it within the same realm of, like, I don't know, like the history of the American Civil War, for example. Like, it's almost a different category of history, if that makes sense.
Well, in Egypt, God sent plagues, in America, they like to partition it. They like to like shuffle slavery off and make it a Southern thing. So maybe they think that God sent the Union Army down instead of plagues.
Mm.
The Lord sent lice and flies. Next, all of the Egyptians' farm animals died, but none of the Israelites' animals died. Then the Egyptians got painful sores on their bodies. A great storm with hail and fire also came to Egypt. This caused terrible destruction. Pharaoh still would not let the Israelites go. Then the Lord sent locusts, and they ate all the people's food. Then there were 3 days of darkness. During many of the plagues, Pharaoh promised to let the Israelites go if the plagues would stop, but he lied every time. After 9 different plagues, Pharaoh still would not let the Israelites go. The Lord told Moses another terrible plague would come. The Lord guided and protected the Israelites as they waited for their freedom.
Wow.
So if you in the chat, you notice they went through a few plagues. They built up and said God had sent 9 plagues. And then what did you do after that?
Yeah, they kind of just ended the story there, huh? They didn't really talk about the next part.
Here, watch it carefully here. We get the plague of darkness, which I think is the 9th
The
plague.
plagues, Pharaoh promised to let the Israelites go if the plagues would stop.
Listen carefully for the
but
10th
he lied
plague.
every time. After 9 different plagues, Pharaoh still would not let the Israelites go. The Lord told Moses another terrible plague would come. The Lord guided and protected the Israelites as they waited for their freedom.
I wonder what that plague was. They don't really talk about. They don't talk about the murdering of firstborn children. I think they skipped out on the big finale. You know.
There was the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness, and another one was going to come. The end.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are different ways of doing it. That was a really repetitive telling, but I thought what was interesting, I picked it because it was short. There are a lot of different ways that different cartoons and children's media depict this story, all of them sick in their own way. But what I thought was interesting about this one is that, of course, they glossed over God hardening Pharaoh's heart and then completely skipped the 10th plague.
Yeah. Side note, this is like, again, like there's so many liberal people in this world who are just like, oh, I know Christians and they're really nice and, I don't really want to mess with it. And it's like, okay, cool. I get it. But it's like, what is this? Like, what do you do with this? Like, I don't know. How does this describe a good and loving God that you serve in any way, shape, or form, right? Like, how does that not disturb you on a visceral level if you have any kind of, I don't know, modern sensibilities of morality, right? Maybe you don't. Maybe that's why. Maybe this is completely justified and God can just kill whoever he wants, but I don't know. It doesn't sound very good to me.
Yeah, that's part of the problem is it gets rid of the whole secular basis for morality that I think we should really guard us against othering other people and treating them poorly.
Yeah. Like God is supposed to be the one true God in his love. It represents the best parts of humanity. That doesn't how? Where? Why? I mean, everybody that says that is usually talking about New Testament stuff, which is like just a completely different interpretation of this one thing. I mean, New Testament God to Old Testament God, you might as well be talking about what the Book of Mormon is to the New Testament. Like the Jewish people don't recognize any of that. They don't say the same things about God that Christians do. I don't know. It's just very the whole thing's just weird, Sod. The whole thing doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, but some Christians try to make sense of it. So we could maybe look at a couple examples of how they try to do that. Would you like to do that?
Oh, I'd love to do that, actually. That's why I'm here.
So we have a couple different options. We have answers in Genesis. Do you want to bring that up? And then we're also going to have a little Frank Turek.
let's save maybe answers in Genesis for last. I think I want to look at Frank Turek first.
Yeah, Frank Turek, for those who aren't familiar with him, is a Christian intellectual who has some really good nuanced thoughts that he expresses in what I would call a non-abrasive way. So let's hear his take on this. Maybe he'll sort out the question of why God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
That's like the most sarcastic I think I've ever heard used. That's incredible how you did that right there. But yes, please go on.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, and NB's Frank Turek.
You know, Pharaoh could be in heaven. This is not, we're not talking about his eternal salvation. Okay.
So I guess my last question is still in Romans 9 and 21. It says, when a potter makes jars out of clay, doesn't he have a right to use the same lump of clay to make one jar for decoration and another to throw garbage into? In the same way, even though God has a right to show his anger and his power, he is very patient with those on whom his anger falls, who are destined for destruction.
Yes. Now, is this a passage about Pharaoh's eternal destiny? No.
It talks about Jacob and Esau and
Right.
Pharaoh and
What I'm saying is this is not a passage about Pharaoh's eternal destiny. This is a passage about God using Pharaoh for his purposes here on earth. And when it says he hardened Pharaoh's heart, if you look at the sequence of hardening, who hardened the heart first?
Who who hardened the heart first, Zod? Who did it first? Pharaoh did it first, Zod. Therefore, God can murder civilians. Come on. And also, throw Pharaoh into hell too, I guess. I don't know.
Frank is literally using a "you started it" argument on behalf of God. you hardened it first.
He did it first, guys. Oh, that explains the murder of the firstborn children. Of course. Like, Pharaoh's not even an elected representative of the state. You know what I mean? Like, he's basically a dictator. I mean, obviously, he's literally a pharaoh. That's his role. But it's like, it's not like the people chose him in any way, right? It's not a democratically elected institution they got there in Egypt. It's just civilian murder, civilian warfare. I don't get it. Don't get it.
So you're saying that unlike Palestine, who should be held responsible for having elected Hamas back before anybody alive today was able to vote, Egypt can't be held responsible for the being ruled by the Pharaoh?
Absolutely. That's yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that the person asking the question brings up this: God can make one jar for like decoration, the other one to throw trash into.
Yeah. He's talking about potters' rights over here. He's saying if potters have the right to make up whatever fucking clay they want, then I guess God can throw us into hell for eternity, I guess. Like, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Sure. Because of human property rights, I guess. Yeah.
And I think Frank Turek might just be a little bit wrong because here, let me actually bring up another
with the specific Romans verse. Yes, because I think that verse. I think the gentleman is correct in saying no. That verse literally is talking about Pharaoh.
Well, I just brought up Exodus 7, where it talks about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. The first thing it says is it has Pharaoh's heart was hardened in passive voice. It doesn't say that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. So you could take it either way. The first reading, if I were just to come upon this out of context, would be that Pharaoh hardened his own heart or that he just became stubborn. But if you go up to the beginning, the first thing God said before any of this was, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that I may multiply my signs and my wonders in Egypt. So, Frank can try the Pharaoh did it first excuse. But God started this whole thing off with a stated purpose that he wanted to harden Pharaoh's heart to basically escalate this whole thing. So I don't really think that's a great excuse.
No. And again, who cares what Pharaoh thinks? What if Pharaoh
Yeah.
is like cool with it? All right. Suddenly, so everybody's okay now. Like, why does Pharaoh get to be the deciding factor here? And again, whether children are murdered, like it just doesn't compute. It doesn't really make sense. But no, they're really focused on like, oh, it's about Pharaoh's decision here. If only Pharaoh had done something different, then the fate of all these people would change. But I don't even think
Yeah.
they really view it that way. I don't know.
There's the problem of all the other innocent people who are caught up in the middle of it. But even if you just take Pharaoh in isolation, like the whole point of any kind of intelligent justice system is to rehabilitate people, right?
Yeah.
So if Pharaoh like hardened his heart and behaved badly the first couple times, wouldn't God want to rehabilitate him? And God is offering him the chance to do the right thing. He's saying, you know, I'm sending another plague, you know, do the right thing now.
Mm-hmm.
Even if Pharaoh hardened his heart first, and even if Exodus didn't explicitly say God had a plan to harden his heart from the beginning, what good is being accomplished by taking somebody who wants to reconcile and hardening their heart more?
Right. And here's another thing too. Christians will use the very dumb defense when they're talking about Noah's flood story, for example. Why everybody gets killed in that story is, well, literally everybody was wicked, right? Like, oh, they're just all terrible and they somehow can't be redeemed. The worst part about it is they can't even use that defense with this story because God didn't kill everyone, right? There's explicitly people that are left alive. Granted, yeah, people do die, but it's never said that, oh, everybody in Egypt is gone, because obviously Egypt still exists today, right? It's still like a thing. So yeah, he left them alive and just maimed the civilization, I guess. So like I don't even know what the benefit was. You're right. Like what's the rehabilitation here for these people? I don't know. There's nothing other than violence that came from this, I guess.
Yeah. God wishes that none would perish, but that all would come to repentance.
Mm-hmm.
So God wishes you would come to repentance, yet you have somebody who comes to him wanting to repent and, you know, would have otherwise done the right thing. And God says, no, I'm hardening your heart.
Yeah. I would ask Frank Turek, Frank, if Biden hardened his heart and your kid was killed because of that, would you think that's okay? Seriously. Like it sounds like a stupid joke, but it's literally the terms in which we're operating here. Like Frank, you think that's okay? God can just kill your firstborn. Doesn't matter. Well, I guess, Frank might say, "Oh, he's already a Christian. He's not, whatever." But it's still stupid. It's still just a dumb story. Dumb, horrific story. And you're right, it is one of the worst ones.
But Dan, maybe the real plague is the friends we made along the way.
Oh, yeah. That's a good response. I like that.
Yeah,
Were we gonna watch more of that Turek video, or was that it? Do we just
No, there's more. There's more.
Okay,
I just
okay.
wanted to bring up that Exodus thing. That's the only reason it came down. So
Yeah.
here's the rest of Frank's response.
Pharaoh did, and God completed the process, which is exactly what Paul says in Romans chapter 1, that when we suppress the truth, if we do that long enough, God gives us up to our own desires and completes the process. So this is no different than Romans 1 in my view.
So along with no, you did it first, he has the additional argument, the Bible says something stupid here, but that's okay because the Bible also says the same stupid thing there.
Stupid over here. Yeah, you're right. Like, wait, the Bible actually contradicts itself over here, so we can actually use this line of reasoning instead. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Super cool. You're
For
right.
all we know, Pharaoh could be in heaven. This is not, we're not talking about his eternal salvation. We're talking about the fact that he was used by God to achieve a purpose of getting the Israelites out of bondage from Egypt. And God can use that person for that reason It's up to him, and he did. But I don't think it's saying anything about whether or not Pharaoh's in heaven. That's not the point of the passage.
Right.
I just love him bringing up the point that Pharaoh might be in heaven.
Yeah.
That's just, I don't think that thought would ever occur to a Christian if they weren't trying to like justify a story like this. Like, number one, he's nothing but a bad guy in a story. Like, would Frank ever be reading the Bible and think, I don't know, I wonder if what's another bad guy in the Bible?
There's lots of bad guys.
Yeah.
But no, I'm looking at the passage here again. Okay, Romans 9:17 says, "For the scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this purpose, to display my power in dealing with you, and so that my name would be proclaimed in all the earth." Like, so it's literally, again, just saying, first of all, this goes back to our free will thing. This doesn't also is a violation of this, just saying, okay, God is explicitly using Pharaoh for the purposes of something. So there's a plan involved, but Pharaoh hardened his heart, and so people had to die because of that. So God just like planned out the murder of these children. It really just falls apart. It just stops making sense a long time ago. I don't know.
We have some people giving bad guys who might be in heaven. Judas, is Judas in heaven?
I think Judas, at least the Catholics, is like explicitly, I think. But
like Goliath. Imagine
Yeah.
Goliath in heaven.
Yeah, Goliath in heaven.
So number one, that's just a weird thing to speculate on. For some reason, that just really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
But what I think is really strange, he's just completely incorrect. Can I replay the end of that real quick?
Yeah.
Okay.
Salvation. We're talking about the fact that he was used by.
Okay. So listen, think about what God is using him for by hardening Pharaoh's heart, and listen to what Frank
God
says.
to achieve a purpose of getting the Israelites out of bondage.
So he was saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart for the purpose of getting the Israelites out of bondage.
Yeah.
That is just objectively incorrect.
Like that even makes any fucking sense. Like, does it okay, first of all, Frank, we got to answer the question. Does God harden Pharaoh's heart or not? Yes or no? That's the big problem. If he does, then not only is he violating the whole free will stipulation, but he's doing the worst way possible in freeing the slaves. You know how you free the slaves? By just making Pharaoh's heart go the other way.
Yeah.
Why would God harden the heart? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, YouTube Punk says that's the point I was getting at, is that prolonged the captivity. So God's purpose is to get the Israelites out of Egypt. Pharaoh says, okay, I'll let them go. And so according to Frank, God, in order to get the Israelites out, hardens Pharaoh's heart so that he won't let them go. That doesn't make any sense.
It is so convoluted and so ununderstandable. I just, and that's the case. It's a lot easier to get really ridiculous with Old Testament stories in particular. You'll notice, and we're talking about old school atheists earlier, a lot of them focus on the Old Testament because that's where these just ridiculous shenanigans really get into play. But yeah, it's a cluster bomb. It's a nightmare. I don't know how you make any sense of this story and come out thinking like, yeah, this is okay. Actually, it doesn't work. It doesn't work out.
Yeah, Frank misspoke really badly there. He could have just said that God had his own purposes, or God used Pharaoh as he wished or whatever.
Yeah.
But to actually say that God hardened Pharaoh's heart to free the Israelites didn't work so much.
We may have gotten one of the best super chats
sorry,
ever. Yeah, which is Zach giving $5 saying, "No, guys, God needs me to be gay for a mysterious purpose," which is awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, you should definitely tell if your friends or family ever question your homosexuality, just say, "Well, God used the Pharaoh and harden his heart to proclaim. So I think God's making me gay to do the same thing." That's awesome. Good for you, Zach. If you are gay or you're just making a joke, I don't know. But anyway, super funny. Love it.
Yeah. It reminds me of that Father Casey guy who back in I don't know, a year and a half ago, he had one of these videos that circulated and all the atheists were responding to it. And he said that I think he said that God uses atheists to challenge Christians. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that sounds familiar in some way.
So
So
God
yeah, I
God
guess we're being
created us.
used for God's purposes too. I don't know. It's all part of the plan,
Yeah,
maybe.
he's letting us be damned to hell so that Christians can be slightly intellectually challenged in their faith.
Yeah, right, exactly. We're just ornaments on the Christmas tree of the house of Christianity. I don't know. It's we're not even a part. We're not even human beings in this conversation. We're meant to make everything else look nicer. That's what it is.
Because Christians
Experiment.
don't have main character syndrome. Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's ridiculous. You want to go into batshit territory now, though? You want to talk about some
oh,
answers in
please, let's
Genesis? Okay, let's
let's
talk
do
about
that.
answers in Genesis. So this is the first time we've talked about answers in Genesis, I think, on Zadanza. I'm sure our target audience absolutely knows who answers in Genesis are, but in case you
Well,
don't for some reason,
the
yeah.
reason was we were afraid to really intellectually challenge ourselves.
Yeah, we were. Oh man, if there's any titan in the Christian intellectual space that, gosh, golly, just really threatens my intellect, it's answers in Genesis, folks. Let me tell you, these folks, these boys are cooking. Okay,
Put our
and
atheist faith to the test.
let's put our faith to the test. Really scared here, Zod. Really scared. They could convince me of something. Just kidding. I've read this whole thing. It's nonsense. Now.
But by the way, real quick,
Mhm.
sorry, before we get started, I have to acknowledge I loved as soon as I brought up Father Casey, I had we have Blossom and Lunar Regolith Phantasmal Terrain. But are you a good atheist?
Yeah, that's true. Are we good atheists? Yeah. Do we
All right, sorry, go ahead.
qualify?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no. So I'm just going to put a disclaimer that we are going to want to stop at every sentence, which we totally can. But let's just make the caveat out there that every single sentence, every single one, Zod, in this article could end with a Wikipedia hyperlink that says citation needed. Okay. And even the ones that have citations, I still think need a little citation needed sign, because we're gonna go into um just straight up made up make believe land territory here. Like that's the level of coping we're doing here. Sometimes answers in Genesis will like cite some studies or cite some sources that agree with them. We're going into just made up land here today, which is really really fun. So let's get started, huh?
Yeah. Do you think you can increase the height by comparison to the width in your window?
Let's see if I can do that. Um, I can zoom in like this a bit. Oh, I think that works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this specifically is talking about the pharaohs of the Bible. In case you guys didn't know, the Bible just says Pharaoh. It doesn't say a name. It's like, imagine if we had a story and a character was just called President. Like they didn't have a name attached to them. Because the Pharaoh in the Old Testament's made up. But of course, if you want to actually defend the Bible in any intellectual capacity, you have to point out, like, well, who actually is this Pharaoh, though? Because the Egyptian people were remarkable in their history. Like, they have a lineage that goes way, way back, and we know a lot about them because they kept records about their own civilization. So it kind of comes into conflict when the Egyptians who kept records on themselves come into the Jewish people who have this crazy story about some pharaoh in Egypt that just doesn't seem to reflect anything in history. So Answers in Genesis is trying to tackle this. So that's what we're looking at today. From the beginning here, the Old Testament writings have been sealed, so to speak, over centuries by Hebrew tradition for meticulous accuracy in preserving the scriptures. Which again, yeah, let's talk about that sentence. Do Jewish records hold up remarkably well when compared to later records? In many circumstances, yes. Just like other civilizations, like Egyptians, who have their own records for things. Okay, so just putting it out there, they're trying to make the case already that somehow the Jewish people just know better because their records are super superior. Okay, Zod, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, at some point the Israelites started meticulously copying their stories.
Mm-hmm.
But before that happened, they couldn't even between Kings and Chronicles, they couldn't tell the same story twice without getting it different both times. Like the
Yes.
numbers of things are drastically different. The way they tell a story is drastically different. Genesis has 2 creation accounts, introduces Esau 2 different times. Like
Right.
even internally, the story is such a mess. So at some point, if they started meticulously copying it, I don't think we're looking at a lot of historical reliability here.
Right. And we can look at, okay, here's a copy of one book of the Old Testament. Here's another copy of the book of the Old Testament. Okay, this matches up. But that doesn't actually matter because these stories all came from oral traditions, right? The reason why we have a written account is because of the Babylonian exile that occurs, okay? After that fact, this is like 500 BC, I believe, 600 BC. The Jewish people started to write down their own stories. Before that, it was all through like oral tradition, or most of them through. I should clarify because there's exceptions, but um, a lot of the scripture is like that, including this one. So it's yeah, the stuff we have written down is fine, but the stuff we have written down is coming from oral traditions, which we just have no way to verify in any way whatsoever, right? So anyway, again, like I said, we can stop at every single sentence here, which I
Yeah.
think we're gonna do with a huge citation needed. But I just want to clarify what kind of argument they're trying to make there, because it's very specific. Now, it says the reduced chronology proposed in the previous chapter. This is a series that they're doing. Okay, so it's referencing this previous chapter. Fits Egyptian history into the post-biblical flood era. In this much shortened time frame, we have shown that there is a consistent and coherent alignment between certain details and clues from Egyptian inscriptions and reliefs and the Bible record that is lost when the widely accepted longer time scales are used. Now, this is referencing again another article, but they're basically saying, yeah, the Egyptians, they actually account for the flood story too. By the way, they're all about the flood story. It totally matches up with their history. We just have to match it up with our own time frame, which is just our own made up bullshit, which is, I don't know, just really amazing there. So yeah, already we're doing some amazing legwork here. Zod, do you have questions, comments, concerns? I see you stroking
No,
your
all
beard.
makes sense to me.
All makes sense so far. Okay, great. We're on the same page. Let's get to the meat of it here. Okay. Oh, here's a little picture here with the caption. The biblical account of Exodus describes the Egyptian army using chariots that became bogged while pursuing the Israelites in the Red Sea. And here's some people
Became
using some
bogged?
chariots, God. Yeah, well,
Became
they became
bogged
bogged.
is that's a
An interesting
weird
way to
word for
describe
like,
murdered people through drowning. Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
Yeah. But no, this is in case you're wondering what that other article looks like. It's literally this. It's like here's a picture of some Egyptians on chariots. You know what else said had the Egyptians on chariots? The Bible. So that's how we know it's true. That's literally the logic they're using here for
People
this.
who lived in the ancient world were able to accurately describe the fact that chariots and horses existed during
Yeah,
their own time.
Exactly. That's how we know it's real, baby. All right,
I
here we go.
also, sorry, I just wanted to add real quick the whole thing about Pharaoh going into the water and getting drowned and everything. You mentioned Egypt's meticulous record keeping. No record of all these plagues that devastated their whole civilization. No record of their king going out and getting drowned in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Christians like to say, well, they're not going to, record their own defeats and stuff like that. But there's no question about whether the Israelites might have been motivated to make this all up to glorify their own nation. So I don't know. All these
It's
excuses just kind of run one way.
it's also just like not true. Like Egyptology describes how Egyptians keep historical records of previous pharaohs, and they literally have like greater ages versus lesser ages of time, like in how the Egyptians describe their own history. Now, obviously, a lot of that's politically motivated, right? And no source from that time is going to be completely unbiased, but it seems like that would be covered on some level. And also, again, we don't even have an idea of who this pharaoh even is, so we can't even point to what that would even be. It's very, very weird and very, very bizarre. And also at the time too, just to point out, right, the difference in time when you look at the movie of the Moses animated movie, and I can't even remember the name of it. The
Prince
very
of
famous
Egypt.
one. Prince of Egypt. When you look at Prince of Egypt, it shows him like literally building the pyramids and stuff. Okay, between like the pyramids were already built 2,000 years before Jesus was born, right? We're talking about a time that's so much further away from when the Jewish people would even be around telling this story, let alone actually being occupied in Egypt. The timelines just, in short, just do not match up. Okay, do not listen to what these people say. They don't know what they're talking about. Let's get actually into this article here. Again, I could just talk about this all day because this is just so ridiculous. But here we go. The Egyptian archaeological sources are completely separate from the Old Testament record that was maintained by the scribes, but both have had their content preserved essentially unchanged over time. And it's interesting here. They are directly pointing out, yeah, these are two separate points of record. So in the case of the pharaohs, the history contained in their monuments and relics has been preserved in stone or hidden away in secret chambers until their relatively recent discovery and interpretation. Similarly, the Old Testament writings have been sealed, so to speak, over centuries by a Hebrew tradition for meticulous accuracy in preserving the scriptures. The Jewish scribes, whose duty was to copy the books, built in certain customs as mechanisms to protect the records these books contained from any corruption or amendment. In some instances, they counted every verse, every word, and even every letter in every book of the Old Testament. They also had practices such as recording the word that was in the exact middle of the book, so that later copyists could count both ways and be sure that they had not left out even a single letter. Now, Zah, what do you think about this so far?
I think that, assuming that this is just entirely correct, which I will, the fact that a culture was very, very careful about how it copied its stories word for word, and the assumption that because of that, they never made a mistake. Copying all this stuff by hand is a very error-prone process. Like, you can be as meticulous as you want, and some mistakes are likely to occur. But because they described just how compellingly careful the Israelites are, that really makes me think that thousands of years ago, all the weird supernatural stuff they wrote about probably did happen.
Yeah, it doesn't actually mean anything about reality. We can have a story told over and over again, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. And also, again, just to point out, Answers in Genesis is, of course, wrong about this. The Old Testament has changed. There is evidence of this because you can look at the scripture yourself. You can see the recovered documents, and you can see that there are differences in this, especially all of the books that were pre-exilic, right? Again, there's different periods in which the time frame in which the books are described, and then also which they were actually written, right? And so when we look at those stories that were written down, they were definitely changed and altered over time. As Zod pointed out, for example, there's 2 Genesis stories. It doesn't make sense if you're doing this all in one sitting, but it does make sense if you're adding or editing or changing things over time. So we're not
even if they took once once it became quote unquote sealed, if whatever you put in that jar and sealed was garbage, then all you're doing is copying garbage over and over again. And so that doesn't really help. Never mind the fact that it's a really huge line of reasoning from they copied very carefully to they never made a mistake to whatever they wrote was accurate to I believe that whatever these people wrote in terms of the supernatural. You would never take that series of leaps for anything other than an existing religion that you want to keep believing in. And that's what is just so embarrassing about apologetics.
Yeah.
That's why I think apologia refers to them as excusegetics now. It's just basically a series of excuses for what you already believe.
It really is. It really is. So we don't have to again go through this whole article, but it's shorter than you think. So I'll just keep going here. The points of agreement between these two independent sources are thus highly significant and serve, on one hand, to calibrate the chronology of Egypt, and on the other, to confirm the detail of the accuracy of the biblical account. Dates in Egyptian history can be assigned, and historical persons in the Bible, such as the Queen of Sheba, can be identified. So I just want to point out here that they want to calibrate the chronology of Egypt. They're measuring Egyptian history by biblical standards here. They're unapologetic about this at all, which is awesome. Yeah, read that again. The points of agreement between these two independent sources are thus highly significant and serve, on one hand, to calibrate the chronology of Egypt, and on the other, to confirm the detail and accuracy of the biblical account. Right? Like, they're using the Bible as the yardstick here. We have the fucking pyramids, son. Like, we can go in there and see shit. Like, we're talking about like a book that's been, transcribed and interpreted and changed over hundreds and hundreds of years. And then we have like original texts from Egyptians themselves, and they're saying, yeah, we need to look at the Bible and see if this shit's legit. Like, that's
just
what's being
the
said
word
here.
Calibrate applied to this just sounds comical. Like, just if you've never done it before, I would encourage everybody, if you have the time, just take a year and do a daily Bible reading over the course of a year. Just pick up Genesis and read straight through Exodus, all straight through the books. And you'll recognize that the idea of calibrating this historically or trying to come up with any timeline is almost comical. Like, even within Genesis and Exodus themselves, try to come up with a timeline of those events that fits any kind of chronology or anything. It's absolutely absurd. Now, Exodus, if you read straight through it, just sounds like a fever dream. You're like fading in and out of stories, and from those to like laws and descriptions of how to build things and stuff like that. I don't know. You can't read the Bible and come up with any kinds of dates or places or anything like that with any kind of accuracy.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And like, again, like, there's also just different texts that are going around at this time too. What we have of the Bible is the result of the Christian tradition. But the Jewish people have their own alternative texts that describe different parts of history. And Islam also keeps parts of Judaism that is different from Christianity. For example, when they're talking about the Queen of Sheba, I believe Muslims literally think that the Queen of Sheba basically became a Muslim because of their understanding of that story, right? Because they're looking at different texts even. They're talking about some of these Old Testament characters. Same reason why, Muslims have a very different idea of what Jesus is, because they're not looking directly at the Gospels. They're looking at what early Islamic scholars or early Islamic writers are saying about Jesus instead. Like, it's interpretation after interpretation after interpretation. We're not going to verify these historical events because of a Bible story at the end of the day, right? Like, we want to have some harder stuff than just, these stories. And we do for Egypt and for many of its chronology. But yeah, for instance, in Genesis,
why in the world
Bible is be all end all. Yeah,
why in the world are you like impressed by the fact that they mentioned the Pharaoh and the Queen of Sheba and stuff like that? It would be like if in 200 years, somebody's like reading an account of a UFO landing or something like that. And then in that story, someone picks up the phone and goes, "Hey, Mr. President Biden, blah, 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 blah." And they say, "See, this story was aware that Joe Biden was the president. That UFO must have landed."
Yeah. But it's even worse because the Pharaoh literally is a made up Pharaoh. Like, it's not even talking about a real person.
Oh, I know.
But yeah, for sure. Here's a little picture of a mummy here saying, especially during the Greek period, the wealthy dead were buried in ornate coffins, on which was the face of the deceased, which is true. So in case people were wondering what this said. Moving on. So from the this is what it says from the about. I just want to point that out. That's in the article. From the about the 7th century. They don't do proofreading in Answer to Genesis. Unlike the Jewish people, who will look word for word and will see, from the middle word whether the whole article is correct. Answer to Genesis does not do the same level of proofreading on their text. But from the about the 7th century BC onward, there are fewer problems with Egyptian chronology. Several pharaohs from this time period are mentioned specifically by name in the Old Testament. They are Hophra, Necho, and Taharka, and the chronology of the biblical account concurs with the conventional dating of each of these kings' known history. The relative abundance of historical data for these later periods makes their timeline relatively unambiguous and serves to confirm the accuracy of the Bible. So, a lot of things happening here, Zod. What are your first thoughts?
Number one, I don't recall that all these pharaohs are mentioned by name in the Old Testament. But then number two,
I was wondering if you'd point that out, Zod. Do you recognize any of these names in the Old Testament?
No, I've read it a couple times, but I can't recall. I mean, obviously, I could have read over those names and not known it, but it doesn't sound like those names don't even sound like anything you would hear in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
They just don't sound like they've occurred in the Bible.
For all of these pharaohs that are being described, these rulers, they're talking about different people in the Bible. They're talking about people with different names. And they're saying, oh, they're actually talking about these pharaohs. Okay. I won't get into the specifics on all three of these, but basically this is what's happening is that they're talking about, in we're talking about the exilic literature, right? So we're talking about like the books of Daniel, some of that kind of period in the Bible. There's a lot of like history talking about different rulers and stuff. And this is them saying, oh, actually, they're talking about these rulers too. So, like, again, let's go back a step here because the whole point of this side was to make a case, right? Can we trust that the Pharaoh depicted in the Bible is what it says he is? And it's like, yeah, because the Bible is talking about these other pharaohs too, which they haven't made the case for yet. They're just saying, oh yeah, we've identified these guys as different pharaohs too. So it's just like very circular. It's just, picking random pharaohs all the way down, basically, to make your case is how this goes. So
Yeah.
it really is just this vicious cycle of absurdity here. So yeah, those names don't appear in the Bible, from my knowledge. They're actually just other pharaohs that they're going to point out there. So and to your point too, like you said earlier, okay, we can have a book that mentions, I don't know, George Washington and Adam Smith and a couple of people. That doesn't make the other people in it more real in some sense, right? Especially if we're talking about writings that weren't concurrent with the time period in which they're writing about, right? These are stories that are told much, much later after the purported events. So anyway, I'm going on rants.
Yeah, the story of the Exodus, I'm just remembering this like offhand from memory. The story of Exodus was written, I think, during the Babylonian captivity, right?
Correct.
And
yes.
If I understand correctly, it wasn't actually a story about the Egyptians. It was kind of a revenge story about the Babylonians. Like they had the Babylonians and their current captivity in mind, where
yes.
they wrote this fantasy about how God saved them from other people to kind of vent their feelings about their current captivity.
Yes, that's right. And to be clear too, okay, so these stories existed in oral tradition before they were written down in in the Babylonian captivity times, right? But yes, in Babylonian captivity is when the origins of the Tanakh come from, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament there. So yeah, again, very confusing, very, very weird. Just all over the place here with our chronology. If you want to move on at this point, I'm okay with that. It just gets just more and more ridiculous and absurd from here. But I'll continue until you tell me otherwise. The
If it's kind of the same thing, I think we could probably move on.
Yeah, that's fine. You know, we're just gonna get into specifics about these namings and stuff, and again, just like making up stories to talk about. There's about 3 more paragraphs here, but I think I've probably exhausted all of my thoughts on it anyway up to this point. But it's just like the short of this article is we can prove that the Bible knows what it's talking about in the Pharaoh story because we can prove that the Bible knows what it's talking about with these other pharaohs. So it's just like making a case based on evidence for another argument that you've yet to make, right? That you haven't actually conclusively proven yet. And that's basically what this is. This is just shoehorning in a bunch of real life historical events and people specifically into the Bible stories and trying to make it work. And that's really all we're talking about here. Again, none of it actually making this any more true in any sense, right? Just
Yeah.
that they can, kind of make it work. But yeah, really ridiculous stuff.
You notice that for all these names they claim are mentioned in the Bible, it could have been as easy as just giving a chapter and verse reference. Where is this person? They just allude to it very vaguely. And the fact that's all they do and that their audience is satisfied with it, I think tells us all we need to know about this whole thing.
Yeah, and what would be cool if the Bible actually just gave them names, or at least gave the Pharaoh names, or at least gave him the right names to call these people, instead of these made up names that don't actually correspond with apparently what was reality for the Egyptian people. So
yeah,
it's a huge clusterfuck. But yeah, this is it. This is Answers in Genesis trying to make the Pharaoh work, and it just explodes into absurdity there, and I love them for it. It's so unhinged. I don't know how else to put it. So there you go, son.
So speaking of unhinged, would you like to see a bag of plague toys?
Yeah, let's go to your plague toys. That sounds like fun.
So this bag here, conveniently labeled plagues, was sent to me in the mail by one of our viewers, and I believe our very first patron named Miranda. And so I was really curious about this. Like, it's a bag of Egyptian plagues. It's a bunch of little plushies, each one representing one of the plagues of Egypt, which is a very strange thing. And one of the first things I did is looked it up because whenever there's a product like this, kind of like the Jesus Ouija board, you wonder if it was made ironically.
Mm-hmm.
This was made by a company called Copa Judaica, I believe. And
Copa Judaica?
Copa Judaica.
How do you spell that?
COPAJUDAICA.
Okay.
And from what I saw, it is actually a real Jewish business that, like, I don't know, it sells really kind of chintzy trinkets and novelties for Jewish people or people interested in Jewish culture. And one of them was this bag of plagues. So I'll pull these out and we can take a look. They're coming out at random, so they're not coming in order. It's hard to even see this one. This is just a little plain black fuzzy ball. Any guesses what this one recommends?
I guess that's the darkness one. I just want to point out
Yeah.
too, I was you did something funny to me this week, Zod. You're like, I'm listening to some old episodes of Zadanza and I'm having a good time with it. And I was like, oh yeah? So I started listening to some old episodes of Zadanza too. And then I was reading the comments. And we got a lot of people that didn't like Zadanza as a name. It seems to be a running theme. But if we can get Jepakopatha as a company, like, we're not even competing in terms of mouthful there. That's pretty crazy.
Actually, I thought this was just pure fuzzy, but it's got little eyeballs on there. See,
Oh, it does have little eyeballs on it. Oh,
darkness has eyeballs. Isn't that cute?
little dark plague eyeballs. That's awesome. Good for them.
All right. Here we got a. It takes a while, but I'm pretty sure this is a frog. If you can tell.
Mhm. A
So that's the
black
plague of
frog.
frogs.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like very, very lightly green. If you catch the light just right, it looks a little green. Here we got another cute little red one with eyes. I think this
Mhm.
is the plague of blood.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't
I
know.
didn't think
Some of
we
these are a
could
little.
make plushies of plagues. You know,
I guess
really
you
cool.
can.
Where's the orange? Where's the chemical orange?
The chemical orange.
Plushie. Or
Oh,
chemical
Agent Orange.
Agent Orange. Where's the Agent Orange plushie? That's what I want to know.
We'll see. I don't think they have that one. It wasn't invented yet. This
Hmm.
one is this one's weird. It's like I don't know if you can tell in there. The other ones are fuzzy. This one's just like this. This one's almost like a pillowcase without the, or a pillow without the case on it. It's just this
Mm-mm.
really raw material. And
What
I
is
think
that
this
one
is the
supposed
hail.
to be? Oh,
The hail?
hail? Okay.
Yeah.
Hail isn't really pillow-like, in my understanding, but
I just mean this. It seems a little unfinished. You probably can't tell on there because it's just getting washed out by the lights. But it's like not fuzzy. It's just like it looks like it looks like there was supposed to be a cover sewn over this and they didn't have it. Here we got this little guy. This one actually looks like it's, has a design to it. Is meant to be an animal.
okay.
I think this is the cattle. So like the plague on the cattle.
Okay. That's
Uh,
all right.
let's
I like
see.
how for some of these you have to do a process of elimination to figure out which one's
Yeah.
which, you know?
I opened these up and actually had to look through them and like put them in order and try to figure out because some of them are just a little ambiguous. This one, can you tell this?
Oh, locusts, I guess. Gosh, they really like using the black for everything.
Yeah, I would have
Okay.
thought locust, but this I think is the plague of flies.
Oh,
Because
flies.
I think
Okay. That makes sense.
I think this crustacean looking thing is the locust.
That's what
Like,
is
look
that
at
at
that.
Oh, that's antenna, I guess.
Yeah, I think these
Okay.
are antenna. And then, but then these like, I think they try to make, the big powerful hind legs, but they just kind of flop out on the
They
side.
just kind of flop out on the side there. Yeah, you would have to tell me that's a locust. I don't think I'd look at that on the street and say, "Oh, that's a plushie of a locust." That looks like
First thing that would occur to me is like a crawdad or a
looks like a
shrimp or
bleeding
something.
seal or something.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm
Yeah,
confused.
you get your plagues mixed up.
So I think this one's probably keep tracking the chat if we've lost. This one looks like a cow, right?
Yeah, or a sheep maybe, a cow.
Yeah, it has little
something.
horns on here. It has the white spot or black
Okay.
spot, black and white animal. But then we also have this guy.
Oh,
So
what is that one supposed to be then?
all right,
Very confused.
let's bring up a list of the plagues. Help us
Where's
in the
the
chat.
child murder one? That's what I want to know. We getting there?
Yeah, so let's see. We got the blood, we got the frogs.
Huh?
Oh, we have lice and flies.
Oh wait, is it
Oh, is
boils?
this a
Is it
louse?
boils? Is that what
No.
No? Okay.
Is this supposed to be a louse maybe?
Oh, maybe that's
Or maybe
supposed to be
the only ambiguity is we have 3 insects. I think this is pretty clearly the fly. And then I think this is pretty clearly a locust.
well, the fly, that's with the lice, right? Wait, no, they're different. Wait,
No,
they are
the
different.
lice and flies are 2 different.
Lice and flies
Yeah.
are different. Okay, wait. Yeah, I gotta remember my things here. Okay, what are we looking at? Okay, there's the diseases of livestock. We've got a locust, we've got lice, and we've got flies. So it's got to be one of those. What's the sheep
Yeah.
then? Well, I'm so
Well,
confused.
this is livestock.
That's the livestock one.
So,
Okay.
so I think between these three, we have to have flies, locusts, and lice.
What could
Frogs.
that?
Frogs were covered. This one's the frog, Zach. But these, yeah. So I can only guess that this is a really weird.
Was
louse.
it the plague of hamsters? What is that?
I don't
What's
know.
that one supposed to be? I don't understand.
This one feels very, very out of place.
That's really weird. I'm not sure.
Let me look up. Let me Google real quick.
Do they have a
Louse
site?
face.
Do they have a site where they can where you can match up the plagues?
No. All right.
Pictures?
Well, let's
No?
just let that go. Now,
Okay.
any guesses what this is?
I can't even tell what that is. What is that?
Sorry, my lights are a little harsh on it. Let's try to put a little shadow on it. There we
Looks
go.
like a dessert of some kind. Maybe a sushi roll.
Yeah,
What do we got
it's
here?
pink. It's pink, and then there's a little white spot on top.
Okay.
This, by elimination, I realize is probably the plague of boils.
Ugh.
Isn't it gross?
Why did somebody do this? Why was somebody committed to this idea?
Yeah, I don't know.
Why would you make a boil plush? What the? What? Yeah.
All right, and last and certainly not least, the one that the cartoon wanted to skip over.
Mm-hmm. There it is. Wait,
We
was
have a
it
little
a
baby
cloud?
head.
Baby
No,
head?
it's a
Ugh.
it's a very sad baby.
I thought it was like a cloud from Mario for a second there. No, that's terrible. What the?
I'm pretty sure
God,
it's the
did
baby
you
because it has
get
this
this
little.
bag from a serial killers convention? What is this?
It was
Who
just sent
made
to me in
this?
the mail. Our patron Miranda just sent us a couple of funny things, and this was one of them.
What the?
But sad little baby head. It's sad because God's killing it.
We didn't even talk about, by the way, the implications of the angel of death. That always kind of rubbed me the wrong way as a kid. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
That
God
an
did.
angel of death comes to kill these things individually somehow. So there are death angels in the army of the Lord.
Yeah, God isn't really slaying them himself. The angel is, and one of the funny little logistical or whatever things of the story is the fact that it was an angel that came through, and the angel didn't know which houses to kill or not. It wasn't. God
Right.
could have easily just said, know who the bad people are and who the good people are, even if he thought a whole society deserved for its children to die. He didn't. The angel of death needed to identify based on who painted their doors.
Yeah. You could have given him
And one thing I think is curious, the Egyptians couldn't have been idiots. They had to have seen what was going down.
Mm-hmm.
Israel was being favored. They were getting triggered by plagues. If that's been happening and you're just the average Egyptian and suddenly you see the Israelites painting little patterns of blood on their door, wouldn't you be like, I think that might have something to do with the next plague. Maybe I'll put a little paint on the door.
Or like
blood.
If you saw someone painting blood on the door, wouldn't you be like, what the fuck are you doing? Like what's going on? I feel like that's kind of a weird thing to do. And also, what if you don't have access to a home? Like some of these people, if they really are slaves, they maybe don't have their own homes in which they could do stuff to them, or perhaps some of them are homeless in some form or another. So what happens to those guys? I don't know. Doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned the fact earlier in the chat. I don't remember who it was, but like the Israelites, they're slaves, but they own their own cattle.
Yeah, they own their own cattle and all have their own homes.
Yeah,
too, which is.
I think they have I think they have a Phantom Menace idea of slavery. Like Anakin and his mom are slaves, but they just sit around in this hut, and he has spare time to build robots and stuff
robots
like
and stuff. Yeah, exactly. And pod races. Yeah, I'd love to see that. Well, Moses should have competed in a pod racing competition with Pharaoh. That would have been a much better story, I feel like. But
Yeah, they kind of did that in the Prince of Egypt, didn't they? Didn't they, like, when they knew each other, they'd chase around in
yeah,
chariots and stuff?
there was a chariot race in them. Yo, what's going on here? Did George Lucas copy off the Prince of Egypt now? What's the story?
And then Moses looks. Remember, there's that scene where Moses looks over at Pharaoh and goes, "Now this is chariot racing."
This is chariot. Dude, they have Jewish stereotypes in that movie too. What's it? Watto. Watto is like a racially insensitive Jewish stereotype too. I think we're onto something. I think George Lucas maybe stole from the Prince of Egypt in some way.
Yep.
Oh man.
So anyway, that was the story of Egypt. We had, we had God hardening Pharaoh's heart. We had plagues on an entire civilization of people. We had an angel that decided who it was going to kill and not based on who smeared blood all over doors, because these are totally normal, non-psychopathic stories. So I guess the lesson is
chariot racing. Oh, why it's so funny, but
now this is chariot racing.
oh man. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. That's I couldn't get over that. That's just really good.
No, you're good. You're good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In any other context, you would just recognize this is a totally dumb, murderous, weird story.
It's true. When the angel of death came by, he was like, "I killed them. I killed all the children and the women too." Whatever he said, the guy. I think I messed up that quote, but there's a through line here.
The Pharaoh's just sitting there dumbstruck, going, "The angel of death killed younglings."
I don't like boils. It's coarse and rough. And they get everywhere.
Gosh. All right. I think we've reached a natural conclusion point of this show, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we did.
All right. Hey, final thoughts for the night.
Final thoughts for the night. You're right. This is.
I think we just have to go with. Now this is chariot racing.
This is chariot racing is a good one. I just want to concur. It's a stupid story. It's only gotten worse over time. I have less and less sympathy for people who, talk about this as being the best thing ever. And yeah, it's fun to talk about it in a context where I don't have to defend it like I did when I was a Christian. So hopefully everybody else enjoyed that too. But if you like us talking about stories in the Bible like this, let us know in the comments. I have been reading comments and stuff recently. You guys have very funny and interesting things to say. So let us know what you like. And of course, liking, subscribing always helps, and really helps if you donate to the Patreon or donate in the chat. Thank you to everybody that's donated in the chat so far. But yeah, I just want to give an official close off there before we sign off with. Now this is chariot racing. That's a
and
good way
if
to end the show.
one comment I saw was from somebody who said they just listened to this, and I could see mostly just listening to this. It's mostly just talk.
Mhm.
But if you just listen, this person said that they looked at their screen during the ending credits and like started laughing.
Yes, I saw that
happening.
comment too. Yeah.
Yeah. If you only listen, you have to watch the closing credits. And if you don't stick around, you got to stick around and watch the credits through to the end, because you can see the little mariachi dance parties. So
Yes.
that's all for Egypt. Everybody have a good night. Thanks, patrons. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Voy a cantar esta canción con mucho cariño de mi corazón a la República Dominicana, la casa del merengue y la casa de la bachata. Voy a cantar esta canción con mucho cariño de mi corazón a la República Dominicana, la casa del merengue, la casa de la bachata. La 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 la, la casa del merengue, La, 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 la. Y la casa de la bachata. Música, música, música.